Bel di Lorenzo is the founder and CEO of Gohddess, an online platform that teaches women the art of vaginal gymnastics. Bel holds space for women to reconnect with their inner goddess and tap into an ancient, untamed power that resides within. Bel teaches the ancient art of Pompoir. I hope I pronounced that okay. Bel's website and her book, The Gohddess Method, uncovers the secret art of Pompoir, an elite practice where women use their vaginal muscles to squeeze, milk, pulse, lock, grip, and even twist. Yeah, some of that sounds quite painful. Their partners during sex. The results, mind-boggling levels of pleasure for both the man and the woman. So, yeah, like I was saying, I haven't really come across this before. So I've done a bit of reading, but I'm fascinated to learn it from you. So you're very, very welcome. Thank you for joining us during your year of travel. We've been through a few countries trying to do this, so hopefully today we'll get it done.
Thank you so much for having me.
It was a pleasure. But if it's okay, I'd like to take you back a little bit just to understand what your teenage and formative years were like. Do you think the teenage Bel, sort of 15, 16, would recognize who you are today?
Oof, that's a great question. I would say actually probably yes, because yes and no. It's interesting. Teenage Bel was very much a dork. I was queen of the nerds in high school. I was very much not getting laid in high school, very much not getting laid in college, very much hanging out with the people who I really connected with were really like the straight A students in chess club. That was me. I started the school newspaper in one of the schools. I was chess champion in another school. Like sex was very much not in my peripheral view at all. But still, I was, for some odd reason, and maybe that's, maybe Catholicism is to blame here, I was very much obsessed with sex. So the concept of sex to me was fascinating. And so I was not taught much about sex. My parents did not talk to me about sex. As far as I was concerned, they only had sex twice to have me and my sister. That's all I knew. And every time I tried asking them about it was just not a conversation that we had. I was raised very much Catholic. But it's not that they weren't open. It was just that it wasn't really a topic of conversation. But still, because I was very much fascinated by the concept of it, I remember just from a very young age, I was just researching about it. I was, from the beginnings of the internet, I was just interested in what was out there and what it meant and how two people could connect in that way and everything that came attached to that. And I remember in high school, I was just learning about how to be good at sex for when the time came. Whenever it would come from me, I just knew that I wanted to be great at it. It didn't matter if when it would happen. I just knew that I would have to be the best, because that's just how I approached everything. And sex was not going to be any different. And so I would research, how to be great at, giving blowjobs and how to be great at this and that. Like I didn't have the first clue about what sex meant, but I knew that I wanted to be good at it. And so I remember I would use my cooler friends who were having sex as guinea pigs, and I would just teach them what I would learn online. And I would teach them and tell them, oh, you guys should try this. Apparently this is really interesting. Oh, you guys should try this because this, and then they would report back to me. And so it was this really strange concept where I was just the sex researcher. And then they would actually just be my lab rats. So that's what I remember young Bel as. And then I want to say at 15, I had a phenomenal sex education teacher who was just admirable. The lady basically came in and told us, a lot of you girls are having sex, but you're just doing it because it's the thing to do with your boyfriend, but you don't really understand that this is supposed to be pleasurable for you. Mm-hmm. And she basically taught us to how to masturbate. She basically taught us, hey, go home, touch your lady parts, try to understand what pleasure is, what it means to you, what makes you feel aroused. Try to understand what's going on here. And that was very radical. But I was a straight A student. I went home and I did my homework. And so then I want to say I was 16. I had 6 years of unadulterated complete masturbation from then on, because it was just what I wanted to be doing all the time since she taught me how to do it. And I was like, oh my God, my fascination with sex only grew from there. And so Yeah, I remember young Belle being very, very sexual, uh sexually inclined, but very much not having sex. If that makes sense. Yeah.
So was the notion of sex then very much rooted in the physical as opposed to the mental side of sex?
Um, for a while, but when when I started sort of understanding what I enjoyed, I remember I had to like read this complex story. I couldn't watch porn. Like that didn't really excite me. I had to read like these complex stories and understand characters and why their love was forbidden, and so that the release of sex was like really interesting to me. And that's what would get me off, I remember. Um and so yeah, I think I was one of the first consumers of like online erotica. I think. And yeah, it was just fascinating to me what made us what made each of us aroused. Hmm.
It's funny, isn't it? I'm similar in this. Very much the written word as opposed to the visual sensation. The
Yeah.
written word is, I guess, in life really. I just love reading. I
Yes.
consume books. I love books. The house is just almost held up by books. I
Hmm.
love them. And I think we're talking before about travel and traveling or not traveling. I think a lot of it is when you can read something, you can literally imagine a scenario exactly as you want it to be.
However you
When you
prefer.
watch something, it's never quite as you would imagine it to be. But when you read something, you can imagine from the color of the sofa to the color of somebody's shoes or the feeling of their hand as you can just imagine and feel it. And I think that's why erotica is, I think it's much more sensual than porn.
Mm.
I think a lot of men in particular use porn and get off very quickly, and it's quick. And it's almost more like the sort of the fast food of erotica.
Yes.
I find
Yeah.
literature is more of a gorgeous sort of tasting menu that you can go wherever you want to with it. Does that make sense?
It's super. It's fascinating. I agree 100%. Even when I'm not feeling particularly creative, and I'm like, okay, I'll just watch porn. I need to stop, and before I can even begin, I need to like in my mind, I need to understand why these characters are having sex with each
Yeah.
other. So I need to create a backstory that interests me enough so that I can
Mm.
go ahead. Um, yeah, it's fascinating. We are very, very complex creatures.
We are, and I talked to a director of ethical porn or sort of feminist porn a few
Mhm,
months ago,
mhm,
and called Inka Winter, and
mhm.
she was fabulous. And when I sort of watch the porn that she creates, it very much is a whole story. It's not
Right.
suddenly. I mean, a lot of the sort of porn clip sites and things, it's just straight in, sex, finished,
Yeah,
done.
yeah, yeah.
Whereas hers were proper. I mean, it was proper, hardcore sex. It wasn't soft porn, but it was there was a story. You could understand why there was a why in the beginning it should have been no, then it was a yes, and the resistance and the barriers and all those things. It was very well created, almost more like literature as opposed to just the act of sex. There was a story behind it, which it does make it better. It just gives you something that you can sort of understand the characters and why they're doing something, as opposed to okay, so the man's come around to fix the dishwasher and he bends over, isn't wearing knickers, and they have sex. Yeah, okay, I understand that. There's not really much of a story there, really, but but with the films, there's something more of a story and there's a backdrop, and it sort of feels a bit more, a bit more
But
real.
even with that, even when it has to do with just porn categories, there it's still really interesting to understand the psychology behind that. I was reading this
Mm.
book, A Billion Wicked Thoughts, and it's just researchers compiling all the information, all the data, all the statistics we have when it comes to internet porn and sex,
Mhm.
right? And for example, how men don't just enjoy watching, beautiful girls have sex, but it's very common for men to look for big big dick, like for
Yeah.
straight men to want to see a woman be fucked by a big dick. And so it's really interesting to me, what's the
Yeah.
psychology behind that? Why does that? Is that because you imagine yourself as this sort of like stallion? What does that have to do? Or they were showing how gilfs, grandmas having sex, and how that's actually very prominent in the UK. And the researchers believe that that has to do with how the sort of the boarding schools of men, and how their first sort of interaction with a woman of power was maybe this older lady with the ruler. Like, it's so interesting in which parts of the world certain fetishes or certain porn categories are more popular than others. And I just find that fascinating as well. Because, for example, even with erotica, not all erotica is interesting to me. There's sometimes they have really certain patterns. Yeah. So interesting.
I'm going to just dive straight into it. So how did you discover, well, first, okay, how did you just discover Pompoir? Can you explain what it is beyond the words I used? And many people will have heard of Kegel exercises. So how does Pompoir differ from Kegel?
Yeah. So when I was doing all this research back, I want to say definitely back in high school, I had heard of the term. I had learned about, how some women were able to sort of control and manipulate their vaginal muscles to just create divine levels of pleasure for their partners, and there were stories about how Cleopatra was able to do this with Caesar, and how Helen of Troy, like all these, beautiful women from history apparently were able to do this. But there was nobody teaching you, there were no instructions on it. So I very much quickly disregarded that. Then when I was in an actual relationship, much later in life, everything was going really well with us except for the sex. The sex component was definitely not there, and I was very sad about it, because at that point I had discovered that was a big component of what makes, everyone's relationship obviously better, but it was definitely very, very important for me and very much a key aspect. But I loved this man, and I wanted to see how we could make it work. And what had happened there was that he had very bad associations when it came to sex. And it's not something that we really talk about, men having sort of trauma when it comes to sex. We talk a lot about women, but not really men. And so I, at the beginning, I thought it was definitely a problem that had to do with me, because, we have this belief that men are always ready for it, always want to have sex. And so if they don't, it's definitely you, honey. So that was very much what I thought at the beginning. He was extremely kind of reassuring me that it had nothing to do with me, and that in a previous relationship, sex had been used as sort of weaponized in a way. And so he had associated it with something very, very negative. So the way that I kind of approached it, because I really like neuroscience, the way that I approached it was, okay, how can I create a new sort of trigger and a new association with sex so that he sees it in this completely new way? I need to bring something new. And so I went back into my research, and I found, again, I read about Pompoir. And again, not much on how to do it. There was one book that I purchased, and I was like, okay, maybe this can be a completely new thing that I do for him. I'm going to learn how to train my pelvic floor muscles to do all of these crazy things for him, because I'm going to enjoy it in the way I want him to start enjoying this and to just relax, right? Sadly, that book, and you'll see this, if you look it up, that book seemed like a poor translation of a different book or something like that, but it was very strangely written. It was written like, for example, for the twisting motion, you should imagine that you have a pen and you're rolling it between the palms of your fingers, the palms of your hands. And so that was all the explanation you had for the move of twisting, for example. And so I was very confused. And so I'm like, okay, is this because of my English? Is my English not as good? Am I not understanding? I went online, I looked up in different forums of people trying to understand. Everyone was having the same issue. The book did not really explain anything about your muscles. It just explained, it almost seemed like a marketing book, right? Like teaching you what you're supposed to know how to do, but didn't actually teach you anything about it. So instead of giving up, I said, okay, no, I'm very determined to fix this. It was the middle of the pandemic. We literally had very little to do besides have sex. So I'm like, okay, I need to figure this out. At the time, because I couldn't go to the gym because we were in very strict lockdown in Buenos Aires, we were doing a lot of body weight exercises, and I was learning a lot about muscle building just for my other muscles. And so I was like, what if I apply everything that I'm learning about kinesiology and physiology to the pelvic floor muscles? Because they're not really that similar. All muscles are trained the same way. And so I started learning about anatomy. I started learning about planes of motion. I started learning about isometric contractions, concentric contractions, eccentric contractions, all of these different concepts of physiology and movement. And so I said, well, how would I approach something like twisting? If I were to try to twist an object or a penis inside of me, how would I go about it? Well, I would probably have to move the front wall of my vagina to one side and the back to the other so that I can shift it in place, right? And so I started designing a program for myself. Monday through Friday, I structured myself some exercises to build a foundation of strength in my pelvic floor muscles, to build some agility, some control, some speed, all of the different components of fitness that I would apply to my other muscles. I wanted to apply them to the pelvic floor. And my very eager partner, he was very happy to be the guinea pig for that. And so basically for months, we just had what I like to call research sex. I basically just started trying these exercises on him. And lo and behold, our sex life started getting better and better and better. He started, exactly what I wanted to happen happened. He started associating sex with something where he could just not have so much pressure on it because I was doing all of these things. And what we started noticing was that I was enjoying sex much more. And I started having, I talk about this really a lot in the book, but like I started having much quicker multiple orgasms, much quicker, to the point where we were like freaking out that it would happen way too fast and so many times. And so we're like, what's going on? The only difference in my life is that now I have a very trained pelvic floor. And of course, he was enjoying it a lot. And we were, our sex life completely transformed. But from that point on, we realized just the benefits were endless. We were noticing that we were way more aroused, having much more sex. Orgasms were way stronger. I started having cervical orgasms, which were not a thing for me in the past. Just a complete 180 change for us. And so he was actually the one who said, well, you need to train other people on this, because imagine women who have never had an orgasm before. Imagine women who, want to bring the spark back in the bedroom. Imagine women who are not as aroused anymore and they want to get that desire back. And so that's kind of how it started. I started training women online. I first started by going back to those forums of confused women like me that didn't understand why that first book didn't work. And I just said, hey guys, I started this program. It's worked for me. I can just train you guys for free. And this one woman answered and I started training her. She had phenomenal results. She was my first case study. And then she told her friends who told her friends. And then for a year, we just started training women for free in exchange for feedback. And so that's how kind of Gohddess started.
Wow. How many questions?
Please.
So part of me thinks, I'm assuming you're not still with the same guy.
I'm not with the same guy, no.
So part of me thinks, oh my God, that poor guy has been ruining for everybody else now. Whenever he gets that text, he's like, okay, can you sort of twist now? The woman's going, what?
Oh man.
Yeah. Okay. If you're going to talk to my ex-girlfriend and she'll explain to you, it's hard for him. And I think the biggest question is, I guess, you talked about working out, and most of us, if you work out, you can, a bicep curl, you can see what it does, or a chest does, or a squat, you can see what's happening. I guess when you're trying to train inner muscles, how different is it? Because, and I guess, women will have perhaps done Kegel exercises when they've had children and things, and they sort of get used to sort of squeezing and releasing, squeezing, holding, squeezing, releasing, etc. So when you were talking about before, very sort of casually about, well, so the front of the vagina needs to go to the left. How hard is it when women first start to feel, to be able to feel that area of the body and actually feel they've got some control over it?
There's some fascinating science behind this. You know how the best way that I can put it is, how belly dancers will sort of move their abs in a way that feels almost independent, like each. Yeah,
like a wave sort of thing. Yeah.
It's basically this. It's the same concept. When you have trained pectoral muscles, you're able to make them bounce. When you have, you can even, we all are born supposedly with the ability to move our ears, but we lose it because we don't use it. But you could actually train it again. Or when you see a pianist move their fingers in a way that you're like, this is impossible. This could never happen. there's a process called cortical remapping, which I find fascinating, which basically means that the more you train a muscle, any muscle, by the way, the better your brain gets at understanding all its different tiny regions. So the more you're training your vaginal muscles, really your pelvic floor muscles, the more you'll be able to differentiate between all of these areas. I always talk about the entrance, the middle, and the top when it comes to the vertical axis. I talk about the right wall and the left wall when it comes to the horizontal axis. And I talk about the front wall and the back wall when it comes to the frontal axis. So really, the more we're training a muscle, the better the map of that our brain has of that muscle gets. And it's not that you're developing new neural receptors or new nerve endings or new pleasure receptors. It's more that you're awakening the ones that you already have. And I read the metaphor that it's like turning the lights on in a dark room. The room was always there, but now you get to experience it fully. And so that's really what happens. And the way that our program is structured is we first lay a foundation of strength, and we get you training and doing sort of Kegel-based exercises, really simple one contractions. And then as you build that foundation of strength in your muscles, that's when you can really start incorporating, okay, I can isolate the right wall and I can isolate the left wall. Oh, and now I can isolate the front and the back. And then I can move them sort of in synchronicity. And then I can actually discover that I can do front and back, but only at the entrance, but only at the top. Oh, left and right, but only at the center. And so basically, the more you train it, the better control you have, like with everything. But at the beginning, it does sound insane. There's no way you can move the front, middle, back. Like there's no way, right? Yes, there absolutely is. And the more you train it, the more you can really clearly differentiate. But it is true, what you were saying at the beginning is it's very hard to visualize at first. That's why my book is half of it is images, and I just use a lot of infographics, because obviously these muscles are inside of you, so you can't see them. You can't see the bicep you see working, right? Mm-hmm. So visualization is a very important component of vaginal gymnastics. But also I always encourage women, as much as, as comfortable as they are, to use their fingers, because if they can use their fingers inside of them, that's kind of the best way to tell that you're doing things correctly and that you're moving the right parts of the pelvic floor muscles.
So the visual that comes to mind, I think people can sort of tie a cherry stalk in their mouth.
That's good. That's great.
I imagine you doing that with the vagina. It's like, there comes out.
So good. I'm going to use that. I love that.
So where did the name Gohddess come from? It's obviously a powerful word. So where did that come from in your?
That was my ex-partner. He was like, when I started learning this, he was the one who said, oh, "Damn woman, you're like a goddess now. You're like a vaginal goddess." And I was like, "Oh, I love that. That's the name. That's what we're using."
Really a joke like this, isn't it?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. And yeah, that was kind of like, and I associate it with so many things, because a lot of people think that this is very much for male pleasure, and I understand why they would think that, you're essentially massaging your partner however you want. But truly, the benefits that it has for women's pleasure are beyond my explanation. Some of our students use it just on their own, just to masturbate. You can essentially bring yourself to orgasm just by rubbing yourself, because they're exercises that essentially are just stimulating your G spot or your A spot. You're basically stimulating yourself however you want. You're building your own orgasm sort of way. So I think when I think about a goddess, really, or a sex goddess, I don't just think about someone who's good at giving sex. I think about someone who really enjoys it and really is able to lose herself when she's having sex. And what this does is essentially that you're basically able to experience sex in a much more enhanced way. And a metaphor that I usually use is that when you put salt on any food and it just brings out the flavor, that's exactly what happens. Your entire vagina just becomes enhanced, and every single flavor is brought up, to score. It's way more palatable, if you will.
Something I read in a previous interview that you did, and I might get it wrong, I think you were a little bit hesitant about writing the book that's gone on to be a bestseller, and you debated long and hard about what to include. Now, and I wondered a couple of things really. So why do you think the process was so challenging? Was it a fear that no one would read it, or was it a fear that someone would steal all the research that you'd done? What was it that challenged you with the book?
A few. I think the first one is more that I've never written anything in my life. So I was like, does this make sense? I never written English in my life. Does this make sense? Can I do this? And this was before ChatGPT, which I feel really sad about because would have been way easier. But I think my biggest concern was a lot of people wanted, I had sort of like my audience divided up to that point because a lot of them wanted to know more about my story.
Yeah.
And then a lot of them, and so I was like, but my story doesn't really, why is that useful? Like I tend to be quite pragmatic and I have a very engineering brain. Like, okay, no, I'll just give you exactly what you need. And this is step 1 and step 2 and step 3. But sometimes, and understandably, a lot of people believe that's not super sexy. Like I can be a little bit too matter of fact and too sciencey when it comes to something as lovely as sex. And so I was like, how do I make this interesting, and how do I make this, a good read besides it being a manual for your vagina, right? But then I decided to just write it the way that I know how to write. And so the other part of it was, my story is very much the story of a dork who just got obsessed with sex, just like she could get obsessed with writing fan fiction, or she could get obsessed with playing piano. Like it truly is just, sex is something that I stumbled onto, and vaginal gymnastics is something that I stumbled onto. And because I have a very obsessive personality, I just went all in. And so I'm like, but it's not really the sexiest story. It's not really, I'm not like this sexual goddess woman. I've been in a handful of relationships. So it was really not, I really didn't think like the kind of person who could own a sex business. But then a lot of people, mostly my friends, they were like, I think you should lean into that. I think you should lean into that sort of dorkiness that you have, because I think it's going to be good for, something that we noticed as we were building our brand was that the sex space seems to have this sort of two personas. You seem to have the very sexual, overt personality, or you seem to have the very spiritual, your yoni and tantric sex personality. And I don't really fit any of those. And so I'm like, well, where are the sex nerds? Like, can I just fit into that? Can that be a category? And so that's the way that I kind of wrote the book. And it's, the first part is a retell of my story, and the second part is very much just a manual on how to train these muscles. And it's very much a fitness book, if you think about it. It explains every plane of motion, every single exercise, the types of contractions, how to move forward with that, a workout schedule, etc. And people have loved it. I've gotten so lucky with the response. And I realized there's a lot more sex nerds than I thought out there. So I think that makes it, if anything, a little bit more relatable. I just thought I didn't fit into this space, really. But yeah, who knows? Maybe it's not that cut and dry.
It's yeah. I think I totally agree with when you said about this. There was almost two versions of people that were either that sort of very, very sort of sexualized and content that tends to be very, very much almost aimed at men, and then there's a very, very mystical and
esoteric.
Yeah, and I think where your sort of niche in a way is that you are stunning looking, you're very attractive, but still have that sort of approachable element to you. I think so. Sort of, I don't think you scare people off, and I think a lot of times you can, if somebody's overly. Sometimes when I interview people, I think, my God, they're so sexual. I'm sort of trying to sort of back away a little bit. Or people are so mystical. I'm thinking, are we actually talking to each other, or are we blind? But I think the benefit you have, and the activities you've undertaken, and the research you've done, pulls people in, because it feels much more. And you can sort of imagine having a conversation in a coffee shop or in a bar, or whatever. That it feels like that, if that makes sense.
I love it. I love that intersection of just. That was the other question that I had. Can I make it? Because I love making jokes. I'm always joking. I'm always being sarcastic. You're British. You know exactly what I'm talking about. But I love sarcasm, and I love humor. And I wanted to add as much humor as I possibly could in the book. and it has a lot of it, and which I love, because some of the reviews are like, I was just laughing out loud because of my sexual misfortunes, really, in my coming of age story. And it was just, I just decided to go all in on my personality, and I've gotten really lucky that not just that I've gotten lucky. I think there was a need for that. I think there was a need for, like, can we just talk normally about sex, like the embarrassing parts, and also kind of like the funny parts of it, and just really understand just how to enjoy it more. It doesn't have to be this esoteric, mystical thing, or we don't have to gatekeep it, or we don't have to make it, obscene. That's something that I was noticing. When I first developed the course, I wanted to be the kind of thing that my mom would not feel embarrassed to do, or would not feel like it was completely out of her reach. Because if anything, the people who I love helping the most are the people who maybe don't consider themselves extremely sexual. Couples who have been together for ages, and maybe, they haven't really had many conversations about sex, and they're just starting out with this. And, I helped some people who were deeply religious, and they were like, hey, we're just starting with this, and we don't know, we've never done anything like this before. And I am so happy to help those people, because I don't think there's a lot of content that speaks to them. I think a lot of the sexual content that we have already is speaking to people who are already really comfortable with sex.
Yeah.
And that's really what I wanted to avoid. I want to make it as universal as possible. And I think the science approach is really good for that, because we can take out the the mysticism, as you said, out of it. And we can just talk about, okay, what does the science say? What does the research say when it comes to sex? And how can we make it better? Because, we're all here because someone had sex. So let's just talk about it normally. So yeah, that's, yeah.
Do you, what's the right word is, do you sort of warn partners when you get a new partner? What's going to happen? Christ, what the hell's going on down there? What are you doing? It's just part of who you are now, I guess.
I think you think I have a lot more sex than I have, but I've been on 3 relationships in my life. So the 3 the first one I didn't know anything about this yet. The second one was this partner who saw me as I was learning it, and then that person already knows what I do. So really, they already, they're if anything, they're expecting me. They're like, okay, show off.
Cool. Come
on. Yeah, I try not to warn them too much, because I think some men can get a little bit scared. I think you mentioned at the beginning, is this painful in any way?
We talk about sort of twisting and locking and gripping or something like that.
Yeah.
Am I going to get stuck in there? Can I get out?
Yeah, it sounds crazy. So it really is, to the degree that the woman wants it to be. It's not. It's never ever painful. What it is that some women, which is something that I love about this practice, that every single student has made it their own. That's why the community that we have associated to it has been instrumental to even me understanding more about this practice, because I use it in the way that I use it. But then some women who are really into sort of the more dominating role in bed, some women have used it for something called edging. And they basically have, there's one exercise called locking, which essentially makes you pull all your pelvic floor or vaginal walls together to entrap the penis as much as you can. Now, you can take this to the extreme where these women are able to, like, not allow their partners to orgasm until they let go. And so it's been fascinating to read their stories and how they've used that move specifically for that, because it's something that they enjoy as a couple, for them to sort of play with orgasm. So, I would say it's not painful at all, but that's the way that I use it. I don't know, depending on the person that you're with, it might be painful, but you might enjoy it. I don't know. So yeah, it's quite fascinating how women just make the practice their own.
What sort of feedback do you get from women that have had babies sort of, vaginally? Now, obviously, it's haven't been there for both my children's birth. It's a pretty big trauma. There's a pretty big thing coming through a pretty small hole, and afterwards, it obviously things feel different, and sometimes people have to be sewn up or whatever, there's tears and things. Do you find women are nervous about this if they've had children, or they are overwhelmed by it? Yeah, what sort of feedback do you have?
So I love helping postpartum women. I think they have a lot. I think at the beginning, what I've seen is that they are really scared that it's not going to work. They're terrified that it's not going to work because what they've heard is that, your vagina will never be the same. You'll never feel the same. And so far, there hasn't been a woman that we haven't been able to help. Even we've had cases where like they maybe needed to have a treatment beforehand and then come back and then start training, but it hasn't been a woman who couldn't do the exercises postpartum yet. And we've trained hundreds of thousands of women at this point. And so that's been extremely rewarding, because I think maybe the narrative that we have, it's a very doom and gloom narrative. It's your body will never be the same. But we have, and I obviously I cannot speak for every single case. Yeah. There may be cases where there needs to be a lot of like recovery beforehand, but in most cases, you have a lot more agency than you think. And not just for postpartum women. A lot of women come to us around menopause, perimenopause, postmenopause, during menopause, especially when it comes to arousal and lubrication. Some people don't know, but pelvic floor training, like stronger pelvic floors, are associated with better lubrication even. And so women come to us and they're like, I used to be a very sexual person. I used to be, very easily aroused, and I kind of lost it. And, I heard that after menopause, it's just never going to come back. And I'm like, well, let's figure it out. Let's try it out. And then we can see. And again, it surprised us every time. And so, which kind of makes me believe that it's more that the narrative we have around this stuff is, it's just very negative. I think we have a lot more agency over our bodies than we're led to believe, perhaps. And sometimes I wouldn't say it's pernicious. I wouldn't say it's purposefully negative. I think maybe we just don't know many times, and maybe it's just ignorance about these things. But truly, the research is already there that women during menopause, they're able to get their desire back, their arousal back, their lubrication back with stronger pelvic floors. And also postpartum, same way. It's the best treatment that you can possibly have is to train your muscles. So it's just really interesting that the narrative continues to be that, you'll be quote unquote, you'll be ruined forever. Your vagina will be ruined forever. It's just very sad that that's the narrative.
And I think it's one of the challenges with the medical field, I guess. Now, and I talked to somebody today that had a sort of long-term illness, and whether it's an illness or it's you've had a child or it's menopause, whatever, the focus is on that particular event. So you've had a child, and the most advice you would typically get would be, okay, don't have sex for 2 months or 8 weeks, or when you first have sex, be gentle and so see what it feels. And with menopause, you might need to buy lube because you're going to find it hard to lubricate, and that's how it gets. This lady had sort of cancer for a long time, and I said, look, just have sex again when you feel like it. But there wasn't ever any. I guess the doctor in those cases is a gynecologist or a midwife, or is a cancer specialist, is a menopause specialist, but they're not a intimacy or counselor or specialist. And I think that's where the big miss is, that people aren't educated about how it is going to feel different, and different isn't necessarily bad. We can change things. Here's what you can do. You can do this. You can do this Pompoir method. You can do all these things. It'd be fabulous if, when women have had children, they got a copy of your book, as opposed to how to raise a child. It's, hey, I've got 2 books here. Great. I think that's the big gap that we don't. Yeah, it's not talked about as part of the medical side of things, because it's not an illness, not having sex that often. It's not
correct.
It's nothing wrong. Nothing we're trying to
correct.
But
correct
could be, and it feels like intimacy of every type should be a big part of our lives, I think.
Correct. I was speaking with this doctor in Miami, from the University of Miami, and we're talking about the possibility of doing research, running research for vaginal gymnastics specifically. And what she was telling me is that it needs to be on a quote unquote sick population, because basically nobody cares about pleasure. In terms, like, there's not going to be funding for a research on pleasure, especially if the women, they don't have spinal cord injury or urine or having undergone certain vaginoplasties. Like, there needs to be something. There needs to be a problem, because we don't really run research. There's not that much funding for research on healthy individuals or postpartum women. It's just a very underserved. It's an underserved part of the population, and also just sex doesn't matter that much. That's kind of the consensus. It's exactly what you say. What's a big deal? And I can understand it. Like, we have more pressing issues for sure, but really, when you see how much sex affects other areas of life, and the few researchers were, I think it was Sweden or Switzerland. I'm getting my two countries confused, but they were talking about how stronger pelvic floors affected quality of life, and not just sex life quality, but quality of relationships, perceived happiness at work, perceived happiness with their friends, and every single measure was improved with better sex and better pelvic floor function. So if we are noticing just how much being sexually satisfied affects the rest of our lives, I don't understand why we're not talking about it in those health terms as part of mental health. I do believe that there's a big gap there. It is something that we're all doing, but it is not something that we're all talking about.
100%. I've seen research as well, different research that has very clear relational causation between a good sex life and the quality of somebody as a CEO or a manager or business performance. All these things, because if you get into work every day and it's terrible sex last night, or not had sex for 2 months, it's very hard to sort of switch off. Right now, I'm going to be a great boss. It doesn't make any sense.
100%.
So there's a huge impact on, and there's some. I'll try and dig it out. There's some study that it's almost tried to put a dollar value to the value. It was almost like the cost of value of good sex. It was almost something like that, like the number. So actually, it's billions. And as you say, it is fascinating. It is a mental health challenge. A lot of people, a lot of men, a lot of men that can't get an erection. Doctor says, well, here's some antidepressants. A lot of women that sort of say, I'm feeling sort of menopause symptoms. Oh, here's some antidepressants. It becomes a very easy thing. Here's some tablets to almost to sort of start you thinking about it. Not right. How can we look at that from a physical perspective as opposed to mental perspective? I 100%. I think there's more and more research now coming out that show the value of healthy relationships, good sex life, all those things in real world dollars. That's what people like. What's the dollar amount we can associate to this? It depends if you can do it. The challenge, I guess, for a lot of things like the wonderful work you're doing is that big pharma companies can't commercialize it. You can't buy a tablet that gives you an Olympic quality gymnast vagina. If you could, they'd absolutely manufacture it. But because it's something that you do, that's the challenge. That it's not a big commercial opportunity for the big pharma companies.
I mean, they are charging thousands of dollars for vaginoplasties. I know a few women came to us before considering a vaginoplasty, and I'm like, wait, let's see if we can train the muscles first. And they were able to save quite a bit of money because those things can go horribly wrong. And I'm not, they can go fantastically right, sure. But they are, besides vaginoplasties, as I understand, that they've come up with like secondary sort of treatments. They're like laser. Now they have like these laser sort of like probes that women can use on themselves that are not approved by the health commission. Like, it's crazy the amount of stuff that they have. And they're like vaginal tightening creams or gels, which essentially just dry you up. So sure, you're
because of social media in particular, there's more and more women having them at younger ages, really. There's a belief that we have to be this tight or it has to be like this, and it's it's because somebody might have heard of has had it done, has been tightened. It's like, oh, well, she had it done, it was fine. But then we all know it's a pretty important place to risk getting fucked up, really, isn't it?
I would not risk nerve sensitivity down there at all. Especially when truly you can train those muscles. But again, we don't often know that.
Yeah.
And it's not often when we do know about Kegels, for example, a very basic form of pelvic floor training. We often just associate it to urinary incontinence, organ prolapse, or
Yeah.
postpartum. We don't really talk about, like, we're talking more and more about pleasure, which is great, but it's still very much associated with, like, it's something that you do when you're older to prevent you from peeing yourself. It's very much
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, hopefully that we can change.
It'd be really useful if you could develop, you probably already thought of this, if you could almost develop a range of toys that almost gave feedback. So if you're, I don't know, if you're not trying to twist in motion, and the toy can sort of sense that, then it's this, or you're trying to do the locking motion, it's like the toy can sort of sense that'd be fabulous. So to get the sort of feedback, and have an app to sort of measure how athletic your vagina is. Do you know what I mean?
That is definitely
the fingers, absolutely, that's probably the most sensitive point you have, but something that people, because I think people like to be able to know they've got something right.
To have some visual.
This feels right, but I think this is how Bel feels when she does it. It's quite right. But if you have the sort of, the Bel approved toy or whatever that tells them, that'd be fabulous.
Yeah, that's definitely on the list of things. I'm working right now with a pelvic floor physician who's trying out. The biggest issue for us is finding out the technology that measures the 360 degrees of the vagina. That's kind of the hard part. Right now, there's some really good devices. One called the Perifit that measures strength really well, but it only kind of limits. The limit is kind of there with strength, and so contractions and releases mostly. But we're trying to look for the technology that really measures the front, the sides, the back, and that's really the hard part.
It's sort of measuring in 3 dimensions, isn't it? You sort of just measuring in 3 dimensions. It's a sort of
correct.
It'll definitely exist, and I'm sure if anybody can find it, you can with your with your nerdy brain.
Yeah,
cool topic.
That's
one thing I do talk about a lot in the on the podcast, and don't take this in any way as a negative. I get very tense now. Is that I think one of the challenges that we've had in society, we've always thought of sex as being PIV, penis and vagina. That's what we thought of sex as being, and I've sort of, particularly as I get older, and sometimes I can't get an erection to last as long, or I'm not as hard as I want to be, etc. So I'm trying to sort of redefine sex in my head as being to think of pleasure instead. And I think pleasure can be, just looking in your partner's eyes, or brushing your partner's hair, or holding somebody, all those sort of things. And and it's not just challenge what you're doing. It's just that sort of, I guess, that broader definition of what pleasure can feel like. And I do think sometimes we do focus very, very heavily on, like, sex is typically this sort of menu of things. Bit of kissing, might sort of stroke her breast, play with the nipples, might go down on her, just give me a blowjob, intercourse, man ejaculates, sex is finished. And that's sort of it. And I think, well, I know there's a lot more to pleasure than that. And some of the most pleasurable experiences I've had sexually haven't actually included sex, if that makes sense.
I love that. Look, it's I think it goes both ways. I think women, for a long time, we kind of raised the flag of, like, clitoral stimulation and clitoral pleasure, because a lot of women don't experience that much pleasure when it comes to penetration, or they very much need clitoral stimulation, and so they were more like, we had a bit of a time where we went away from penetration a little bit, or we kind of prioritized other things. But I do think part of it is the fact that a lot of us are not taught how to enjoy penetration, and how to enjoy what's coming inside of our vaginas, because it's supposed to be very pleasurable, but because most of us don't really know that there's muscles around it, or we're not really taught how to enjoy it. That is the biggest benefit that we get from our practice. You just enjoy everything inside of you much more. And a lot of women who had never ever experienced orgasms from vaginal stimulation now start enjoying penetration way more, and they start orgasming that way. So I think there's one of the aspects is the fact that, that hasn't really been taught before. I think another aspect of it, the other thing that this has is that we still don't understand why. We have a lot of theories, but we don't understand why. But once you start training your pelvic floor muscles, your entire genital region just becomes way more active. And so, something that happens a lot that we talk in the communities, you just get aroused really fast with seemingly not as arousing things. So maybe you will start kissing your partner, and really quickly you find yourself going through that loop of arousal, oxytocin release, orgasm, even before there's any penetration involved, even before you're actually having quote unquote sex. And so the first experience of that, people are like, what just happened? But then it starts happening more and more and more. And what we believe happens is basically a Pavlovian conditioning of you're training your vaginal muscles as you think about sex. Your vaginal muscles, even when you're just even when we see an attractive man on the street, they might start pulsating normally. We start getting hot, we start getting aroused, and the genital region always gets engorged with blood, and that's very normal for us, even if we're not touching ourselves, right? And so because the vagina is so connected to arousal, even if it's not being stimulated, training it, if anything, makes every sort of sexual interaction, sexual thoughts, sexual desire much more enhanced. So yes, what will happen as well when you train this is that seemingly innocuous activities or seemingly foreplay activities like kissing or touching or just, being close to your partner become really pleasurable and really sexual very fast, just because your muscles are basically very reactive. So that happens a lot. So I would say, it might seem like we put a lot of emphasis on penetration, and I love talking about it just because I know that not many women enjoy it, and they still do it even if they don't enjoy it. And so I just want them to enjoy it a lot more. But also a very common, almost guaranteed side effect is that every sort of sexual interaction will become really pleasurable, even if there's no penetration involved.
Yeah, that's what I would think from when you first started talking, when is that the holistic benefit of this is that you, first of all, you're much, much more in tune with your sexual feeling, your sexual being, your goddess self, if you like. I think that's the real power of it. That, like I say, it's not, even though a lot of things you're teaching are about how to isolate certain muscles, it's not isolated. It's that think of the vagina as a receptacle, I guess.
Correct.
And that receptacle is just so in tune. It's almost very, very aware. It's a hypersensitive, but in a good way.
Absolutely.
And I think that's where the benefit comes from. It's just allowing women to recognize that they can orgasm, they can feel certain ways, they can control certain things, and it's their body and their mind is going to change, really. And that's one of the big frustrations still, I think, for so many people as well. I think the stat might be something like, I don't know, only 20% of women orgasm from penetration typically, but 80% of men know their partner orgasms. I'm sure that's not quite right. Unless one guy is sort of servicing a lot of women, then it's so men still think that women get off just by having sex, and women don't. They'll either finish themselves off later or whatever. But I think where your work is so powerful is that it just allows a more informed conversation, and that the body in general is just more, it's like any athletic endeavor, really. It's like any training that we do. If you train at the gym or if you go running all the time, you're not just improving your running speed, you've got cardiovascular, your fitness, your stress, your relief, all those things. It trains everything together. So one thing can do this big holistic. And I think that's where I think the power of what you're doing is. It's that real holistic approach to.
It's exactly that. It's sex training. I love it. We have a lot of, that's a big thing that women say is just, they just show up as more, confident sexual beings. And it's really hard for me to put into words, but it's almost like you walk differently.
Yeah.
When you do this, and I always say, when people are like, ask me like, okay, what's like one downside of vaginal gymnastics, and I'm like, you'll be horny all the time. If you really don't have time for that, don't do it. I will tell you, I'll be the first one to tell you don't do it, because there's a lot of energy that comes out. Or learn how to release it in other ways. If you're single and you don't feel like masturbating 8 times a day, maybe channel it into music, channel it into art, and that's what I'm doing right now. I'm learning a bunch of instruments. So that's
I was going to say, what are you doing with your year of nomadic travel then?
I'm just bringing my keyboard around everywhere. Yeah.
Do you think is there another book in the works, or what does the? I want to ask this in 2 parts really, but I'll ask the first part. What does the next 5 years hold for you, do you think?
We are kind of looking at different avenues. My biggest one, and what I really want to pursue, is science. Because as you can see, I'm just wildly interested in science, but I'm not a doctor. I'm not a physician, and so I really want to. I really want to study to become. I would love to have a PhD, for example, in vaginal gymnastics. I would love to run research in vaginal gymnastics. So I'm very much not going anywhere. If anything, I just want to bring it into the science, and that's the part that really motivates me, because it means that if we can have the medical community on our side, we can basically help a lot more women, and that's really what I want. The other side of it is I don't like talking about stuff that I don't know, and I will never have a penis, and I will never have, the male equipment. But we've had men who have decided to, on their own sort of will just start training their pelvic floors using kind of the similar exercises that we teach. And they came back to us with benefits, and they were like, hey, maybe you should write for men, because I started doing this and I started having.
I was going to ask, is there a male equivalent to this?
So not that we've done, but from a completely informal, research, what we've seen is that the biggest benefit that we get reported to us from men who start training just because they want to, is a lot of men start having non-ejaculatory orgasms. So they realize that they're coming multiple times, maybe not ejaculating during the same sexual encounter, when they start training with these exercises. We have no research to support it. We have no idea of why this is happening. We have obviously hypotheses, but that's the part that I would love to explore more. So yeah, I guess I'll just have to start recruiting men and just give them a bunch of exercises. But that's something that I find fascinating. And if there was going to be another book, I'd probably love to do at least a year of research behind this and understand this part a lot more, understand how men's pelvic floor works. I wouldn't imagine it's extremely different, but I would love to know, just a full long-term study of how this affects men.
Because yes, it is different, and we all know that, but the inner muscles are actually not that dissimilar.
No,
so in the same way, you sometimes see male bodybuilders can manipulate their abs and their stomach and do certain things, and like say their pecs or whatever, and it's similar down there. So I do think, there is a sort of male equivalent, sort of Kegel, where you're sort of squeezing and releasing, and I think that notion that either helps you maintain an erection or make you stronger, or has that non-ejaculatory orgasm. I think it's a fabulously interesting piece. It did a bit, I thought, from a science perspective. I don't know whether this is too emotionally challenging, but there are a larger number of women than you might hope there to be that have experienced some form of trauma and something that's happened where they haven't felt in control of their own body, and after that they find it very hard to relax, and there's a huge amount of tension, and they freeze up, and all those things, and you would feel that medically, it's almost like helping somebody to walk again after an accident with a physiotherapy, sort of doing a sort of a medical discussion, dialogue, groups of people that undertook your exercise. Because I do think, I think, and I have no backing to validate this, but it would absolutely help them physically. I also think there'd be a big improvement in their emotional feeling, and like who they are and their control again. So I think that could be a really, again, challenging for lots of reasons, but I think that would be so beneficial. It might be somewhere that a medical society might be interested in exploring, I think. But yeah, that could be something to look at.
We've worked with a couple of women who had been abused, and we've worked with their therapist as well. And that was a huge, truly the muscle part of it was almost pretty easy for them to achieve. It was more very much the psychological part of it that they just didn't feel like sex was something that they could, where they had any agency anymore. And I think what these exercises really did for them, much more than really, much more than the physiological side of things, was give them a lot of agency. Because what we worked on a lot was bringing themselves to orgasm without anyone else, just doing it on their own through the exercises and relaxing and stimulating themselves through their own muscles. And once they were able to achieve that, they felt much more comfortable about even the idea of going back into potentially an intimate encounter. I can't pretend to understand the psychology that goes behind that.
No, I don't think you need to. But I think there's thankfully there's much more appreciation now of sort of somatic healing and recognizing the body. So I think a lot of therapists are wonderful, and I for therapy and lots of, but there comes a point where it sort of stops here. So I'm sort of I'm cured, but I've worked through my issues with my parents. I've worked through this, I've worked through that, whatever, and I've got to this point. But then at some point, the body has to release what it's holding on to. I think that's where your work comes in, is that yes, mentally you can go through it, and you can relive it, you can explore it, you can get to a point where you know it's not your fault and it's somebody else's fault. But at some point, the body's got to just let go of what it's been holding on to. I think that's where, your technique and your tool and your counseling is so valuable, I think.
Thank you. Yeah, I love that interaction, because we thankfully we've given a lot more importance to the psychology, but sometimes it's the body first. Sometimes they're, they just talk to each other constantly, and so sometimes working on the body can help the mind heal as well, and vice versa. And so I just find that interaction very interesting. The body keeps score, and will always, like, there's always going to be a really, really strong relationship. There's this, I'll just talk about one more research that I find fascinating, and I'll stop. But there was, I was doing this research on cervical orgasms, which is basically an umbrella term for anterior fornix and posterior fornix orgasms, which are the fornixes obviously in the front and in the back of the cervix. And so there was a study on women with complete spinal cord injury. So basically, the vaginal region is connected to the brain through the spinal cord. But these women had complete spinal cord injury, and yet they were still able to have cervical orgasms. And the researchers found out that the cervix was connected to the brain through the vagus nerve, so bypassing the spinal cord. And the reason why they were able to have these orgasms was because it was going through a completely different set of nerve cordings. And so it was, so they were still able to experience this. And that also explains why, for every woman listening will know that cervical or really deep orgasms tend to be extremely emotional and very spiritual. And you feel like it's like a full body, almost mystical spiritual experience. And they're much different to other kinds of orgasms. And I didn't understand why until I found this research. And the vagus nerve, they call it our emotional highway. And it very much connects our emotions to our bodies. Is the reason why we feel things in our gut, is the reason why we might get goosebumps when we see something that excites us. So it really connects our emotions to bodily sensations. And that's why the cervix is so emotionally acute and emotionally sensitive. And so we can have a lot of trauma there, but we can also experience a lot of pleasure there. And very emotional pleasure as well. So if you see someone cry after they have a cervical orgasm, that's why. It's because it's connected to a different set of nerves. So I just find it really fascinating, just how our bodies work and what is connected to what. It's just really interesting to me.
It feels like you need to clone yourself 4 or 5 times. You've got so many things that you should be doing, you need to be doing. It's like, it's just that. Are you? A serious question now. Are you aware of how important it is to take care of your own mental and physical well-being. Because you are, and in the nicest possible way, you are quite obsessive about some things, which I think is fabulous. I feel the same about some things. But sometimes it can be overwhelming. Do you manage to? I know you're traveling now, but again, even that takes a lot of brain power to travel and to organize and to cope, whatever.
Yeah, a lot.
Do you manage to look after yourself mentally and physically as well as you should do?
Better so now. I think physically, I've always, not always, but in my adult life, I've been very healthy. I used to be quite overweight, and after I lost all that weight, I became really obsessed about being very healthy and treating my body really well. But mentally, I've always been, through no fault of my parents, because my parents are very emotionally aware people, but I've always been very much like, figure it out. Like, don't be a wuss kind of person. just because for some reason, right? And so I never really thought about mental health much at all. And this year, I think, after a couple of not so great things that happened, and also the fact that I've been traveling, I mentioned instruments, and truly, my favorite form of therapy is to just sit down and play the piano. And I noticed that seems to soothe me a lot, because I can ruminate. I ruminate constantly. I'm very much someone who will continue thinking about and even if I understand that the more attention I pay to thoughts, the more they'll come up. I just can't help it. I am someone who just overthinks and overthinks and overthinks and overthinks. And some activities like exercise, like music, like just doing things for the fun of it, which is something that I hadn't considered before. If something doesn't have a purpose, why would I do it? But now just doing activities that have nothing to do with achieving any goal, they seem to be very good for me. They seem to be very good for my mental health. I went to a perfume class the other day, $15 perfume class. And I learned about how to mix different fragrances. And it was just it was like a meditation practice. It was really silly, but it was just wonderful for me. And so I noticed that those sorts of things that completely take me out of my own head, they're just very healthy. So yeah, I'm understanding it a lot more now, I think.
Yeah, once we get past childhood, we forget how to play. So just play for the sake of it. Run around and spin around and just lay on the floor and kick your feet in the air, whatever. We forget about.
Everything becomes so serious.
Play without any purpose, really. So,
absolutely.
Absolutely. My last question is, so you're at your 80th birthday party, so many years into the future, and people are giving speeches, or they're giving memories of you. They're telling the things that they love most about you. What do you think people will be saying about you? What would you like them to say?
There's one that I love, that people have been saying that people have been saying for a little bit, but I've never really believed it to be true. But I really love it. Is that they say that I make my friends, at least, believe that their dreams are possible. And that is my favorite thing for anyone to ever say about me, because whether it's because they see me trying out crazy things and getting lucky enough that it happens, or I just get excited when people tell me about the stuff that they love doing. And so I'm like, okay, this is the way that we get it done, and this and this and this, and I try to paint a picture of how it could actually get done. But I think the best possible compliment is that I make people believe that what they can envision they can achieve. That's my favorite way to live life. It's my favorite thing to do, is to listen to people's dreams and ideas and figure out a way to make it happen. I would love if people can say that.
That's a wonderful thing to have people say.
Yeah,
I put lots of links into the notes and things, but the best place for people to find you is on the website.
Yeah, if you go to Gohddess.com, I say Gohddess just because it's the word goddess, but with an H after the O. So if you go to Gohddess.com, you have access to everything. We have a free guide. We have a bunch of articles that I write. You have access to our YouTube channels. You have obviously our program, our coaching, our book. Everything is there. I just wanted one place so that people could, learn about this whichever way they see fit or they like most. So yeah, just go to the website and you'll have access to everything.
Thank you so much. It's been incredibly, it's just been enjoyable.
Yeah.
Really enjoyable. And I really appreciate what you're doing. You're doing some great stuff. So
thank you so much.
Keep it up, but don't get burnt out.
I enjoy the burnout. It'll be great. Thank you so much for having me. This has been lovely. We could talk for hours, man. I think that's the danger.
Next time you're in London, just let me know and we'll.
Oh yeah.
Hours.
Oh yeah. Thank you so much.